By the end of this series, a pattern has emerged so clearly that it demands a direct answer. Germany invented the assault rifle. The world adopted it 30 years later. Germany flew the first jet fighter. Every air force in the world flies jets today. Germany discovered nuclear fission. The weapon it made possible ended the war. Germany built the Tiger tank, the most feared individual weapon on the battlefield. Germany's engineers and scientists were, by any objective measure, among the most talented in the world. And Germany was completely, utterly defeated. Not narrowly, not by a close margin. Defeated so thoroughly that its government ceased to exist, its territory was divided and occupied, and its military was dissolved entirely. How do you reconcile those two facts? The most innovative military nation of the 20th century, losing to countries that in most cases copied, simplified, and mass-produced its ideas. The answer to that question is not just a lesson about World War II. It is a lesson about how power actually works. In warfare, in economics, in competition of any kind. And it is a lesson that is playing out right now in the conflicts and competitions of the 21st century. This is the final episode of this series, and it is the one that explains all the others. There is a seductive logic to the idea that the best weapon wins. It feels right. If your rifle fires 3 times as fast, you should win the firefight. If your tank cannot be penetrated, you should win the battle. If your aircraft is 160 kilometers per hour faster, you should control the sky. The problem is that wars are not decided by individual engagements. They are decided by thousands of engagements, fought simultaneously, over months and years, by millions of soldiers who need to be equipped, supplied, fed, and replaced when they are killed. At that scale, individual weapons superiority becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is throughput. Throughput is the rate at which a military system can produce, deliver, and sustain combat power over time. It is not about what your best weapon can do in ideal conditions. It is about how many weapons you can put in the field every month, how quickly you can replace losses, and how long you can keep fighting before your system collapses. Germany's approach consistently prioritized the performance of individual weapons over the throughput of the system producing them. The Tiger tank was optimized for individual combat effectiveness. The Me-262 was optimized for individual flight performance. The STG-44 was optimized for individual infantry effectiveness. Each was, in its category, the best individual example of its type. But optimization for individual performance and optimization for systemic throughput are often in direct conflict. A weapon that is 50% better than its competitor but takes 10 times as long to produce is not a strategic advantage. It is a strategic liability, because you will have one for every 10 your enemy has, and individual performance rarely compensates for a 10-to-1 numerical disadvantage. America understood this through its own industrial culture, shaped by the assembly line, by standardized parts, by the systematic application of scientific management. The American industrial tradition was not about making the best possible product. It was about making a good enough product reliably, at scale, with consistent quality. The Sherman tank was not the best tank. It was the best tank American automobile factories could produce in large numbers. The M1 Garand was not the most accurate rifle. It was the most reliable semi-automatic rifle that Springfield Armory and Winchester could manufacture at scale. The Soviet Union arrived at the same conclusion through brutal necessity on the Eastern Front. The T-34 was not the best tank in 1941. It was the tank Soviet factories could produce in the Ural Mountains, faster than German forces could destroy them. The PPSH-41 could be stamped out by the millions, issued to every soldier in an assault unit, maintained without specialized training. Both America and the Soviet Union had learned, one through industrial tradition, one through existential necessity, that sufficiency at scale defeats perfection in small numbers. Germany never learned this lesson. Every weapon in this series tells the same story from a different angle. And that story is fundamentally about resource allocation. Resources in wartime are finite. Steel, aluminum, rubber, fuel, skilled labor, factory space, scientific talent. There's only so much of each, and every program that consumes them competes with every other program. Germany pursued too many ambitious programs simultaneously, each optimized for maximum individual performance, none scaled for mass production. Consider what German industry was attempting simultaneously at its wartime peak. The Tiger I and Tiger II tanks, each requiring 300,000 man-hours. The Me-262 with its Jumo 004 engines requiring overhaul every 25 hours. The V-1 flying bomb and V-2 ballistic missile programs. The Type 21 submarine, the Sturmgewehr 44 with its new intermediate cartridge. The nuclear program. Each was a genuine technological achievement. Each consumed resources that could have produced proven, simpler weapons in larger numbers. The V-2 rocket program is the most striking example outside our main series. Germany spent approximately as much on the V-2 as America spent on the Manhattan Project. The V-2 killed approximately 9,000 people, mostly in London and Antwerp. The atomic bomb killed approximately 200,000 people in 2 detonations and ended the war in the Pacific. Same resources, catastrophically different results. Albert Speer calculated after the war that Germany's industrial output could have been 2 to 3 times larger if resources had been concentrated on fewer, simpler, more producible designs. The question was never whether Germany had enough resources. The question was whether it could organize those resources effectively. And the answer, consistently, was no. The contrast with American resource allocation is stark. The War Production Board, established in January 1942, imposed systematic priorities on American industrial output. Programs were evaluated not just on technical merit, but on producibility. Could this design be built in sufficient numbers to matter? If not, it did not get priority, regardless of how impressive it was technically. Germany had no equivalent discipline. Programs multiplied. Resources fragmented. Output fell short of what Germany's industrial capacity could theoretically have achieved. There is another dimension to this story that goes beyond industrial economics. The human cost of Germany's approach to its own people. Germany expelled the scientists who built the American atomic bomb. That expulsion was the most dramatic example of a broader pattern. Germany's racial policies systematically destroyed a significant portion of its own human capital at exactly the moment when that human capital was most needed. The 1,600 scholars expelled from German universities in 1933 were not just a loss for nuclear physics. They were a loss across every field that required trained, talented people. Medicine, chemistry, mathematics, engineering, all were depleted. German business lost entrepreneurs and managers. The cultural and intellectual life of Germany was dramatically impoverished. War is ultimately a competition between human systems. Germany deliberately reduced the quality of its own human system while simultaneously demanding more from it. The soldiers who died trying to maintain Tiger tanks that broke down constantly, the pilots who died in Me-262s caught on landing approaches by Allied fighters, the nuclear physicists who worked for 6 years without achieving a chain reaction, all were operating within a system made less capable by its own choices. America was not just drawing on its own native talent. It was drawing on the talent of the entire world, concentrated in one place by the circumstances of the war. The Manhattan Project's scientific leadership was European. American industry was increasingly diverse, drawing on immigrants from across Europe who came to America precisely because America offered opportunities their countries of origin did not. This is not a coincidence. It is a structural feature of how open societies compete with closed ones over the long run. Open societies accumulate human capital from everywhere. Closed societies that define themselves by excluding portions of their own population are competing with one hand tied behind their backs. The lessons of this series are not museum pieces. They are playing out in real time. The question of whether to build the best possible weapon or enough weapons to win is being debated right now in defense ministries around the world. The United States has spent decades pursuing the F-22 and F-35, technically extraordinary aircraft produced in smaller numbers than simpler alternatives would allow. China has responded by producing larger numbers of capable but less sophisticated fighters. The debate about which approach is correct is the same debate Germany lost in 1942. The question of how to allocate resources across multiple ambitious programs is being asked about hypersonic missiles, autonomous drone swarms, directed energy weapons, and artificial intelligence systems. Every major military in the world is simultaneously pursuing multiple revolutionary technologies, each consuming resources that could be spent on larger quantities of proven systems. The ghost of the Uranverein, the Tiger tank program, and the V2 rocket haunts these decisions. The question of how open societies accumulate human capital is being answered differently in different places. Some countries are restricting the flow of scientific talent across their borders. Others are actively recruiting talent from everywhere. The Manhattan Project was built by refugees. The history of American technological leadership since World War II has been built substantially on immigrant talent. How countries answer the question of who belongs in their scientific and industrial systems will shape the technological competitions of the 21st century in ways that parallel the competitions of the 20th. And the fundamental lesson: that systemic throughput beats individual perfection, that scale beats genius, that the side that can absorb losses and keep fighting outlasts the side with the better individual weapons. This applies not just to military competition, but to economic competition, to technological competition, to any sustained contest between organized human systems. The company that can ship a good enough product to 1 million customers will usually beat the company that spends years perfecting a product for thousands. The economy that produces sufficient quantities of necessary goods reliably will usually outlast the economy that produces spectacular quantities for a few. The institution that recruits from a wide pool will usually outperform the institution that restricts itself to a narrow one. These are not new insights. They were demonstrated at enormous cost between 1939 and 1945. We began this series with a simple question: why did the most militarily innovative nation of World War II lose? The answer, across 6 episodes, has been consistent. Germany lost not because its weapons were bad. Its weapons were often extraordinary. Germany lost because it optimized for the wrong thing, for the performance of individual weapons rather than for the output of the system producing them, because it pursued perfection when sufficiency would have served better, because it expelled the human capital it needed to compete, because it made resource allocation decisions driven by political preference and personal obsession rather than strategic logic. America and the Soviet Union won not because their weapons were better. Their weapons were often inferior. They won because they built systems, industrial, organizational, human systems, that could produce sufficient quantities of sufficient weapons, absorb losses, and keep fighting. The Tiger tank achieved a kill ratio of nearly 6-to-1 against Allied armor. Germany still lost. The Me-262 was faster than anything the Allies could put in the air. Germany still lost the air war. The Sturmgewehr 44 was the most advanced infantry weapon of the conflict. Germany still lost the ground war. Germany discovered nuclear fission first. America dropped the atomic bomb. Individual excellence in the context of industrial-scale warfare is not enough. It has never been enough. And across the 80 years since the end of World War II, in every major technological and economic competition, this lesson has been demonstrated again and again. The side that scales wins, not always, not immediately, but consistently, across the long duration of sustained competition. Sufficiency at scale defeats brilliance in small numbers. That is what World War II taught. and it is still being learned.